So reverse outlining. We already got to know each other. Today, we're really going to talk about four and a bonus, so it's really five techniques for reverse outlining that I like to use either when I am planning a story or when I'm at any stage in the revising of the story. And we're going to not only talk about how to create the reverse outline itself, but also to understand how that reverse outline will help you plan the revision. I know there are probably some people who are sitting there saying, oh no, I'm allergic to outlining. I myself do not love outlining. So I like to call this outlining for pantsers. I am maybe as I do a little bit more planning with each novel that I write. So now I maybe call myself a plantser, but I am not a person who really loves to make a super, super detailed outline. So if you're not either, don't worry. I have some easier tools than maybe the kind of strict outline that you're thinking about. Okay, we already talked about where you were in the world and where you are in the writing process. So one of the reasons that I teach story scaffolding is because a lot of people come to me and say, I'm pitching my story and I'm not getting the results that I wish I was, and I don't understand why. And so one of my big goals in doing this work is not only to bring wonderful stories to the world, but to stop writers from experiencing the pain of pitching or publishing prematurely, right? If you pitch or self-publish before your manuscript is really, really ready, you can miss an opportunity with your dream agent or editor. You can have disappointed readers. You can hear crickets in your inbox and have no idea if it's because they haven't even read your pitch yet or because there's something wrong that you haven't been able to identify on your own. It can ultimately lead you to lose confidence in your story and in yourself, and can make you shelve the book of your heart. And we don't want that. What we want to do instead is to give you the tools so that you can revise and then eventually get your story reader ready and send it out into the world with confidence. So we will talk about how we can get there using some of these techniques that I have in this course. And so, like I said, 95% of my clients reach out to me and they say, I think I'm ready to pitch. I just want like one final set of eyes on my pitch package. My pitch package audit is one of my most popular packages that I offer. And 95% of the people that do that end up doing a deep revision instead of going straight to pitching. I say 95%, it's actually a little higher than that. One person I have said, oh yeah, go ahead, you're ready to pitch. I really don't have very much to offer here. Almost everyone else, I can find something that they need to do that will really elevate the story and make it actual reader ready. And so a lot of times we can even tell just from looking at some of these reverse outline documents that we're going to make that there's a story level problem. And so I'm going to teach you how to get your manuscript reader ready, how to make sure that it is with this story scaffolding that we're going to talk about. Okay, so as promised, here are four tools for reverse outlining. And as I mentioned, we are going to do a bonus fifth tool as well, which kind of uses a couple of different techniques from these other tools. Like I said, it's really, really difficult for authors to hold an entire 70,000 word story in their head all at once, right? If somebody is suggesting big picture revisions, it can create panic. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to add a point of view. I don't know how to remove a point of view. I don't know how to change a timeline or add a new subthread or subplot. So these four tools will help you not just document what you have, which is ultimately what a reverse outline is, right? If you're planning your manuscript and it's not written yet, and you write an outline, it's a planning document. If you already have an idea for a story that you've been working on and you create an outline after the fact, that's the reverse outline, right? It's a reverse because it's coming after you've already started to write the story. And so these tools for reverse outlining will help you assess your story at the big picture level before you even touch your manuscript. And the advantage to this is if you do already have an agent or an editor, or even just a critique partner or writing partner or book coach who's engaged to help you with your story, they can look at things at the big picture level and help you make sure that you've got it right before you go in and start tearing your manuscript apart. Because there's nothing worse than trying something out on a whole 70, 80, 90,000 word manuscript and being like, well, that didn't work, so I got to go throw that all out and go back to what I had before. So I just want to say up front that it's not my intent that you'll do all 5 of these techniques for reverse outlining in one go. That could take more than the entire month duration of this course, and it's a lot of work. Instead, I'm just intending for you to familiarize yourself, to pull different pieces that appeal to you out of these techniques, and make the best high-level reverse outline that works for you. I oftentimes will recommend that everybody starts with the pitch, and that's why we're going to talk about that first, and then pick one of the remaining methods of reverse outlining. And those 2 pieces together can be really, really, really useful. So you won't, for example, necessarily need to create a tentpole scenes outline, a book map, and a synopsis. You just will pick one of them that appeals to you. The tentpole scenes outline is probably the easiest to complete. So if you've never done anything like this before, that'll be a good place to start. It's a 7 to 9 bullet point outline, a very, very high level that's just focusing in on the key turning point scenes. And if you are an experienced outliner and really, really love digging in or know that you have a tricky revision, the book map is like the Cadillac of outlines. So we will talk about all of those today. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is create a short form snapshot of your story so that you can assess it for these kind of crucial questions about story scaffolding, your plot arc, your character arc, your story goal, and the stakes. These are all things that you've probably heard us talk about before. And this will let you also test out potential fixes in a low stakes way, right? So you haven't changed your entire manuscript. You've just tried adding that new character or changing their arc or changing the way that you're letting the plot sequence happen. And it's so much easier to do it in a 5-page outline than it is in your 300+ word manuscript, right? So that's what we're going to do today. Okay, so like I said, we're going to start with the pitch. And whether you are self-publishing or trying to traditionally publish, you will want to create a pitch. This will be your jacket copy if you're, it'll be useful for your jacket copy if you're self-publishing. And of course, if you're pitching agents and editors, this will eventually become your query letter. But we're not going to worry so much right now about personalization and your bio and all of that kind of stuff. We're really going to focus in on the pitch part. And that's the part that is going to give us the comp titles, the genre, and the word count of what you're working on. If you're still in a first draft and you don't know exactly how long it's going to be, don't worry about the word count for now. You'll just put an estimate of what is normal for market, and that'll give you a word count to shoot for. And then after that, you're going to have a hooky pitch of no more than 200 words, right? That just introduces the first 25% or so of your story max up to the inciting incident. No spoilers here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go through answers to what I call the 4 essential questions that your pitch must answer. And so kind of the idea behind this is if you can't answer the 4 questions, you know you probably have a story level issue. If you can't answer it without writing 2, 3, 4, 5 pages of explanation, you might not be really, really focused in on what the heart of your pitch is yet. So that's why starting with the pitch is difficult, but it's also extremely, extremely useful. So I like to think about it in terms of starting with a log line. This is actually something that we're going to all create today here in a couple of minutes. I like to think of it as a two-part short pitch, right? The first is that genre, age category, word count, and comp title that I talked about. And then the second part is a 1 or 2 sentence hook that introduces your character, your plot, your stakes, and maybe your theme. If you are working on a story and you don't have some recent comparable titles, I would say things that have been published in the last 3 to 5 years that would sit on the shelf next to your book, then probably one of the things you know right up front is that you've got some reading to do. And part of the reason that I'm a big proponent of that is because the market is changing really rapidly. And agents and editors want to know that you know the market and you know where your book is going to fit. And then, of course, if you are self-publishing, you are your own marketer. So you have to know where the book's going to fit on the shelf so that you can pick the right Amazon categories and all of that type of stuff. So that's where understanding the comp titles is really important. And I know somebody said that they were thinking about switching subgenre, and reading deeply in your genre is a really good way to understand subgenre. I could probably teach an entire course on fantasy subgenres. In fact, people have asked me for that, and I would love to do that. Because it is complicated and they're shifting, and the genre expectations, the tropes, even the conventions are different from subgenre to subgenre. So understanding what you're writing is a really, really important part, not just of selling it, but of crafting the story in the first place. Because your readers are going to be they're going to be familiar with certain aspects of the genre, and they're going to have these expectations, and sometimes it's good to surprise them, to subvert tropes and all of that type of thing, but you want to do it with intention and not by accident because you haven't read enough in your subgenre to know what it's all about. Okay. So like I said, we've got these 4 essential questions that we want to make sure that your pitch is going to answer. So what is the protagonist's story goal, right? Your protagonist is your main character. If you're writing memoir, that's the story version of you, which you'll hear me often separating story you from author you, because it's an important distinction to make when you're writing memoir. What's at stake if they don't achieve the goal? Like if your story goal is just to go down to the corner and get a cup of coffee at the local Starbucks, there's not necessarily anything at stake. You might get a caffeine headache if you don't achieve your coffee, but there's not something that is going to grip readers and make them keep reading. So you want to make sure that that combination of the story goal and what's at stake if they don't achieve the story goal is big enough, is weighty enough to support an entire novel or memoir story arc, right? That's part of that story scaffolding. If your story scaffolding is too small, then you're going to get 10,000 words in and your story is going to unravel, and you're going to be like, okay, the end. This is maybe it's just a short story instead, and that's okay. That can happen. Good short stories have come out of those types of situations, but it doesn't help you achieve your goal of writing a full book length novel or memoir. Um, and then, of course, the other piece of the story scaffolding is what's the internal arc, which is the character, how the character changes over the course of the story, and the external arc, plot. So if you're feeling a little unsure of those last 2 things, we're going to talk about those a lot next week. So just sort of come along for the ride on this, and we'll dig way more into how to bring that character arc and plot arc together next week as well. But that's a piece of information. If you're like, I'm not really sure what my character arc is, or I'm not sure how my plot arc and my character arc are working together, that's definitely something that you'll want to assess in your manuscript to make sure that that your story scaffolding is working. Okay. So I have a couple of just little examples here just to give you an idea, using some published books that maybe you have read. I created a made-up logline for one of my favorite recent books, When Women Were Dragons by Kelly Barnhill, which is a beautiful speculative historical fiction. And so this is the logline that I imagine for When Women Were Dragons. See if you can identify the character goal, the stakes, and the plot arc here. So when Alex Green's father moves her and her younger sister B into their own apartment, she doesn't understand why. But when memories of a taboo family secret related to the mass dragoning of 1955 begin to emerge, she will risk everything to protect B from her dangerous obsession with the forbidden dragons, even if it means repeating her mother's mistakes. Has anybody read this book? Oh, it's really, really good. If you can imagine the McCarthy hearings, but instead of prosecuting people for being communists, you're prosecuting women for getting angry enough that they literally turned into dragons en masse in 1955. That is When Women Were Dragons, and it's a really, really wonderful. Sort of biting piece of social commentary, but also a really beautiful story of friendship and sisterhood. So I highly, highly recommend it. So this short, two or three sentence log line is what we're looking for to just get a sense of who the main character is, right? We know Alex Green and her little sister B are going to be the main characters of this story. We know kind of what sets the story in motion, which is that at a young age, they're sent to live on their own without their father. And then these family secrets start to emerge in Alex's memory about this mass dragoning of 1955. And we know that she's needing to protect her sister, but also that there's something to do with her mother. And notice that this doesn't give us the ending of the story. It's actually only evoking like the first 10, 15, 20, 25% of the story. It's just enough to hook us, but to give us a really clear idea of what the story is about. Okay, so now I've gone ahead and expanded this out into a little bit longer pitch, just to give you an idea of what I would like for you to create today. So I did the nuts and bolts line that has a women's fiction novel complete at XX words. I'm not exactly sure how long the word count is, but When Women Were Dragons exposes a world that wants to keep women small, their lives and their prospects, and examines what happens when they rise en masse and take up the space they deserve. And then I've got your jacket copy, which I imagine would have been a pitch. This was not Kelly Barnhill's first novel, so she probably just got to pitch it, maybe even straight to her editor because she's got lots of accolades under her belt. But if she were to write a query for this book, this is what I imagine it would be. Alex Green is a young girl in a world much like ours, except for the most seminal event, the mass dragoning of 1955, when hundreds of thousands of ordinary wives and mothers sprouted wings, scales, and talons, left a trail of fiery destruction in their path, and took to the skies. Was it their choice? What will become of those left behind? Why did Alex's beloved Aunt Marla transform, but her mother did not? Alex doesn't know. It's taboo to speak of. Forced into silence, Alex nevertheless must face the consequences of this astonishing event. A mother more protective than ever, an absentee father, the upsetting insistence that her aunt never even existed, and watching her beloved cousin B become dangerously obsessed with the forbidden. So part of the reason that I included this is just a short 125 words. One of the things that I often hear is, it's impossible to answer those 4 questions in 200 words or less. But here is a robust, complicated, speculative world, and we've captured it in 125 words. So just all that to say, You can do it, I promise. So the color coding here, I've got, the first couple of lines are really giving us an idea of character. Although you'll notice that I've got a little tiny bit of world building and scene setting in here as well. You really want to give in just enough world building or scene setting to evoke the genre, but not to go into any sort of detail about what's happening. You want to really, really give the bare minimum required and keep focused on that plot and character. Then we get into the story goal, which ultimately for Alex is to find answers, right? Like, why did this mass dragoning happen? What is going to happen to me because I've been left behind? Where's my Aunt Marla? And why didn't my mom transform? I don't know, and it's taboo to speak of. So we start to get a sense of what the plot is going to be about. That Alex is going to be trying to find answers. And then, of course, the green is the stakes, not only the consequences of the mass dragoning, the protective mother, the absentee father, this idea that her beloved aunt never even existed. And then there is, of course, the beloved cousin, who ultimately is actually raised as her sister, who becomes obsessed with those dragons. So again, we still haven't gone past the 25% mark in this book, but we've just fleshed out a little bit more what the story is actually about. And I know a couple of you are writing multiple points of view, so I did want to go ahead and include one that is a dual point of view because those are a little bit different to write. And so, if it's possible, if you have 3, 4, 5, 6 points of view, that you'll just write your pitch from the main point of view. You'll choose one main point of view and use that. But if you are writing 2 points of view, quite often you'll actually include both of them in the jacket copy. So I picked Little Fires and Everywhere by Celeste Ng, which again is another beautiful, beautiful book. In Shaker Heights, a placid, progressive suburb of Cleveland, everything is planned, from the layout of the winding roads to the colors of the houses to the successful lives its residents will go on to lead. And no one embodies this spirit more than Elena Richardson, whose guiding principle is playing by the rules. Enter Mia Warren, an enigmatic artist and single mother who arrives in this idyllic bubble with her teenage daughter Pearl and rents a house from the Richardsons. Soon, Mia and Pearl become more than tenants. All 4 Richardson children are drawn to the mother-daughter pair. But Mia carries with her a mysterious past and a disregard for the status quo that threatens to upend this carefully ordered community. When old family friends of the Richardsons attempt to adopt a Chinese-American baby, a custody battle erupts that dramatically divides the town and puts Mia and Elena on opposing sides. Suspicious of Mia and her motives, Elena is determined to uncover the secrets in Mia's past, but her obsession will come at unexpected and devastating costs. So again, even with 2 point of view characters here, with this jacket copy, which I think I took straight from Amazon, to be honest, is 178 words. It introduces the characters in very few words. You get a very strong idea of what their conflict is, right? Because story is all about tension and conflict. You have 2 characters or more. They want things that bring them into conflict with each other, and that tension is what keeps those readers turning pages. So if we know that that Elena Richardson is in this planned community and loves playing by the rules, we can already get a picture of who she is and how she's going to react when this enigmatic artist and single mother who is breaking all of these rules shows up on the scene. So then we get a really good idea of what the actual conflict is going to be about, this custody battle that divides the town and puts Mia and Elena on opposing sides, which of course we would expect just based on the way they're described. And then we find out, her obsession will come at unexpected and devastating costs. And of course, if you're familiar with this story, this is not a spoiler because it literally happens on the front page. It starts with the Richardsons' house burning down. So they're not joking about the unexpected and devastating costs of this story. And then we dip back in time and find out how the house caught on fire. Okay, so now we're going to take just a little bit of time and draft your own logline or pitch for your story. I know a few of you are on the bubble about which story you're going to work with. So I would say just pick one and try to introduce your main character, a story goal, the stakes. Think about whether you need to have a sense of genre. And how you might sum up the plot arc and the character arc. I'm going to go ahead and put the dual point of view example back up on the screen so that you can take a look. And we'll just take about 5 minutes and jot down your ideas. Don't worry right now about word count, or don't worry about it sounding like a pitch that's going to hook the agent of your dreams. Just really try to get those story elements down, and I'll just put them in the chat too. Um, okay. Yeah, so just jot those down. We'll take about 5 minutes and then we'll come back. Let's just take another 1 minute or so to wrap things up. And it's totally okay if you haven't finished. Okay, I'm seeing eyes coming back up, so I'm gonna stop there. If you're still working on fleshing out your log line and your short pitch, that's totally okay. No worries. And like I said, you'll get these slides and all of the materials to help you walk yourself through this after the class as well. Okay, so whose answers felt kind of fuzzy on that? Anybody? It's okay. I see a few hands raised. That's okay. So we're gonna start with that log line and we're gonna move on to the next tool. Now, this one is my favorite, the messy synopsis. And so I want to just really quickly talk about the difference between a messy synopsis and the pitching synopsis that you've maybe heard about before. Usually, a synopsis used for pitching is like 500 to 1,000 words. It introduces no more than 5 characters. It doesn't contain very much world building. It really focuses on those 4 questions that we talked about: the story goal, the stakes, the plot arc, and the character arc for that main character, right? It's pretty short, 500 to 1,000 words. The messy synopsis is something different. This is something that I use as an essential piece of my own planning process. It can go up to 5 to 7 pages. It can even go longer, especially if you have multiple points of view, if you have detailed world building, if you have multiple timelines. It can really get kind of longer than what you would get for the pitching synopsis. But this is the kind of document that's going to let you follow all of the different threads of your story, not just your main character, but maybe your essential side characters as well. It's probably going to have some stuff in it for all the things that you want to change in this next revision of your story based on the work that you've already done or the feedback that you've gotten from agents or editors or readers or whatnot. You're going to cover all your major characters, the main plot and character arc, but also the subplots, the twists, the red herrings, the unexpected turns, what the protagonist is up to, etc. Okay, so what does the messy synopsis look like? Oops. Like I said, it's going to start with the logline that you just created. Remember that logline and or the extended pitch, if you did go ahead and create that, is going to introduce just the first quarter-ish of your story up until that inciting incident that sort of changes everything for your main character. Then it's going to really dig into the character arc, the plot arc, and the stakes, just like we were talking about with the 4 essential questions of the pitch. So a messy synopsis is going to give you, like I said, that big picture view. It's going to give you more flexibility on format than an outline. There's no word count restrictions. There's no formatting. You can one technique that comes from screenwriting is you can put the main characters in all caps to let them stand out in your synopsis. A lot of times I'll put love interest or protagonist or antagonist or POV if I've got multiple points of view character, just to remind myself what I'm working with. You can use whatever notation makes sense for you in the synopsis because it's not something that you're going to share with a publishing professional. Maybe your book coach, but probably not anyone else, right? So it's for you, your critique partners, to really kind of capture a snapshot of your story. It's also a space where you can explore those tropes and genre conventions we were talking about, especially if you're thinking about making a switch of subgenre. But it's really just practice talking about your whole story in big picture terms. Okay, we're not going to stop and create your synopsis now because that's a pretty in-depth process. But once you do, and I do have some downloadables in that Google Drive that I was talking about that will help you walk through the process of creating the synopsis, you're going to audit your synopsis the same way we just audited the pitch. We're going to ask the 4 essential questions that we asked about the pitch, but we're also going to look a little bit deeper because, of course, the synopsis goes all the way to the ending of your story, right? You don't hold back. You spoil the ending. You give away all the twists and turns and the red herrings and all of those sorts of things when you're writing the synopsis. And then you look at whether your turning points in the story are clear, like those big moments that change things, that change the trajectory of the plot. Are they clear? Can you easily identify the main character's story goal and how those plot turning points change the character? Do you know what's at stake if the main character doesn't achieve their story goal, not just in the opening of the story, but at each point throughout the whole story? And do the main events that happen reflect the story goal? So again, if you have a main character who really wants true love more than anything else, and everything in the plot is about them going on an adventure to sail by themselves around the world, it's going to be hard to bring those two pieces together, right? What you want is the character to be taking actions that make sense given what their internal change arc is all about. And that's the kind of thing that makes a story really memorable and really, really sing for readers. Okay, so if it sounds like creating a synopsis is just like too hard to think about, I don't know what those turning point scenes are. I'm not sure, what this synopsis would look like. I recommend starting with what I call the tentpole scenes, and this really comes from Disney Pixar's rules of storytelling, and it's going to sound really familiar to everyone because it's essentially fairy tale format, right? So this is your once upon a time. There was a princess, and every day she had to clean and take care of the house for her evil stepmother and stepsisters until the fairy godmother let her go to the ball. And because of that, she went to the ball, met the prince, fell in love, but she had to leave by midnight. And so she ran away, but she left her glass slipper behind. And because of that, the prince searched all over the entire world looking for the person who would fit this beautiful glass slipper until he finally found Cinderella, and they lived happily ever after, right? So you're just going to create basically a fairy tale outline for your story. And this is basically going to give you those turning point moments that I was talking about in the synopsis. Because if you have to tell your story in 5, 7, or 9 major points, you're going to pick the big ones, right? It's a really easy way to start to see what those turning point moments are. And so you'll see that I've also woven in a little bit of talking about story structure into the fairy tale structure. So the once upon a time is your main character's ordinary world. This is where they are when the story starts. You want to have a sense in that ordinary world that something's not great. So even though Cinderella is starting with, singing with the birds and feeding the mice and the chickens and loving on her dog, she's also working really hard. She doesn't have very nice quarters. She's kind of up in the top of the house, and she's not living the life of a princess as we might imagine a fairy tale to be about. So we have the sense that every day she's doing this cooking and cleaning for these stepsisters and the stepmother who don't appreciate her. And then something happens. They announce that there's going to be a big ball for every woman in the kingdom. So of course she wants to go to the ball. That's your inciting incident. Notice that it's different than whatever tension needs to be in the opening of your story, right? Like a lot of people think that the inciting incident has to happen on page 1 or in the first chapter, because otherwise, how will you hook readers? But that's not true. You can hook the reader with something from the main character's ordinary world and give space for that inciting incident to happen more like in 15 to 25% of the way through the story. There are some notable exceptions based on genre, right? So if you're writing romance, that meet cute between the main character and their love interest is often in chapter 1. If you're writing thriller or mystery, quite often the crime or the dead body do appear, sometimes even as soon as the very first paragraph of your story. But in most other genres, you are looking at the inciting incident happening like about 25 to 33% of the way into the book. And so you have to do things in that ordinary world to show us what the character's story problem is, and to let us know enough about what they want and what is working and what isn't working in their lives that we'll understand when we get to the inciting incident why it's going to upset the fruit basket and turn everything upside down. Okay, so once the inciting incident happens, then you've got what can be called fun and games. It can be allies, enemies, and obstacles, depending on the type of story that you're talking about. This is the run up to the middle of your story, where they're trying and failing to solve whatever problem is introduced to them in the inciting incident. Until finally they reach a climactic moment. And if your story is not a tragedy, they will succeed in some form with the climax. If you're writing a tragedy, they will fail. Right? They will face their fears. They'll have the option to change, and they'll either choose not to or find that they're unable to, which is again, depending on genre expectations and that sort of thing. That's a thing that can happen. Not if you're writing a romance, also not if you're writing middle grade, but in YA and adult, a tragedy is a thing that can happen. They can face that dark moment at the climax, and they can fail to change, making the story a tragedy. And then you have the resolution or the denouement, which is kind of like ever since this day, that day where they triumphed over adversity at the climax, they lived happily ever after, or happily for now, or in the gray area that is typical for life, depending on the type of story that you're telling. Okay, so I just used Cinderella as an example, but I also love to use the movie Rocky, because it has a very, very tight structure. We talked a little bit about how a lot of classic structure talk comes from our original early plays, and many screenplays are excellent ways to study structure, because they're pretty set. You have a 90-minute movie. Things happen at a very, very tightly plotted way. Like if you look at Rocky, I also like to use the movie Goonies, just because that's one from my childhood that I think is really fun. If you look at these stories, they follow this outline in a pretty clear way that shows how plot and character come together. So consider the movie Rocky. Once upon a time, there was a local boxer who believed it when the world told him he was nothing but a bum. Every day he worked and tried to win the heart of his true love, Adrian, but mostly he failed, until he got the opportunity to fight heavyweight champion Apollo Creed in a high-profile boxing match. Because of that, he had to find a trainer, Mickey. Because of that, he had to train harder than he ever had in his life. Because of his hard work and perseverance, he finally wins Adrian's heart, until finally he walks into the ring determined to prove to himself and his community that he's not a bum, not by winning, but by going the distance, which he does. He's still standing after 15 rounds. And ever since that day, he knows he's not a bum, and he lives happily ever after. So a couple things that I'd like to point out here. There's no subplots here, right? There's a whole subplot that goes on with Rocky's job, with his friend Paulie, Adrian's older brother. There's none of that is in this sample tentpole scenes outline. It's just the essentials, the main plot and character arc for Rocky. So the plot arc is whether he's going to win or lose when he trains for and fights Apollo Creed, and the internal arc is all about answering the question, am I really a bum? And of course, that idea of him being a bum is reflected not only in the match that he's going to fight with Apollo Creed, but in his relationship arc with Adrian, right? Adrian is essentially the external personification of him not being a bum, because if he was a bum, he wouldn't deserve the girl of his dreams. So I recently rewatched this movie because I teach using Rocky so much, and like it hasn't aged as well as it could have. that Paulie is really, really a jerk in the movie, but it is a really, really good example of story structure. And it's short. So if you want to rewatch it, if you like Sylvester Stallone, or if you have an attachment to the nostalgia value of this movie, it can be a really good way to think about story structure. Now, I do also want to say that these examples that I'm using are primarily linear narratives. They are coming out in chronology, and that may not be what your story structure looks like, and that's okay. You can still do a tentpole scenes outline. If you have multiple points of view, I highly recommend doing a tentpole scene outline for each point of view. If you have multiple timelines, you might do one for each timeline. I'm my current work in progress. I have 4 point of view characters and 2 timelines. And so I have a lot of tentpole scenes outlines that are keeping track of the major events in all of those, because it's a lot easier for me to look at how they fit together if I've got 4 different lists of 6 or 7 bullet points than if I have a 90,000 word novel and I'm trying to look at the big picture of how these chapters are going together. Okay, so I think rather than taking time to do your tentpole scene outline right now, I want to make sure that we have enough time for questions at the end. But I do want to point out that when you go to draft your tentpole scene, there might be a few things that are that I didn't point out in Rocky that are worth considering. And the first one is the midpoint. And the midpoint is really a point, as the name implies, it's 50% of the way through the story. In romance, it's quite often the declaration of love. In more of the traditional heroic journey, it's often the moment where the main character has to dig deep and may even literally look in the mirror and say, do I have what it takes to overcome these challenges that have been put before me? And then, of course, typically what happens at that point is they say, I'm going to give it the good old college try. And then in the second half of the story, they're acting much more heroically than maybe they were in the first half, where they were doing a little bit more of that fun and games or wandering around and not really making the choices that are going to help them overcome the story goal. Also, the dark night of the soul is often that low moment before the climax. It's the point where they say, I probably can't do this. I'm probably not going to make it. I'm probably going to lose everything. It could be the all is lost. It can either be because of something external that happens. For example, if you think about Star Wars, Luke Skywalker and his team have gone off to destroy the Death Star. They're flying through space. They have one chance to to explode the Death Star, and Luke's wingman gets shot. Han Solo has deserted him to go try to work things out with Jabba the Hutt. and Luke is all alone. So he can at this point either give up and the Rebel Alliance is sunk, or he can dig deep and go ahead and try to do this thing, even though the odds are he's going to die in the process. So of course that's what he does, and he uses the Force and you know blows up the Death Star. Aided by Han Solo sort of triumphantly flying back into the picture to help him out and give him that shot that he needs at the Death Star. So the midpoint and the Dark Night of the Soul are good things to try to include in your tentpole scenes outline when you work on that at a later time. Okay. So we've covered a lot of material, and here is your bonus. The inside outline, this is Author Accelerator's tool for outlining. I'm an Author Accelerator certified coach. This is a little bit more of the traditional outline that maybe you have been familiar with in the past. And it can take the tentpole scenes and just dig a little bit deeper into the connective tissue between those tentpole scenes. It will consider not just what happens in the story, but why it matters to your story. So when you do the first round of your tentpole scenes outline, or when you do the first round of working on your messy synopsis, you might just start with the plot, right? That might be the things that come to mind first. This happens, then this happens, then this happens. There are all these things that you can download online, these plot grids and plot maps and beat sheets and that sort of thing. And they can be helpful. Many of these tools have their place in your writing practice. But if you do the external without the internal, you're going to miss that chance to have the story scaffolding really working together to prop up your story. And so the thing that I like about the inside outline is that focus on not just what's happening, but why it matters, right? That why it matters is going to get at character motivation, which is of course what we're going to be talking about a lot next week. So the inside outline, there is a template in the Google Drive that I put in the comments. It is literally for each scene or chapter in your story, it's a bullet point for what happens and a bullet point for for why it matters. So keep in mind that the why it matters can be why it matters to you. That's different from the scene goal that the character may have. Sometimes it's good to know both of those things, what the character's goal is for a particular scene, and what you as the author are trying to show by including that character's scene goal in the scene. And once again, there's some analysis that you can do to audit your inside outline once you've created it. And you can do this with the tentpole scenes too. These are all questions, no matter which version of reverse outlining you choose, that you can add, that you can ask yourself about your reverse outline. Does it make sense? Is it logical? Would the characters really behave that way? If you've spent your whole story setting up the character to be a rule follower, if there's a moment where they have to break the rules, you have to make it really clear why they're doing it, because that's out of character for them, right? And in order for the reader to really invest in your story, they're going to have to understand why the character is doing what they're doing, how that ties into the story goal that you've established for them, and if it fits their motivation, their backstory, and all of the things that you've revealed about your character so far. Is there a problem in each particular scene that we the reader get to watch being solved? Like, is there a desire? Is there a conflict? So often I hear people say, like, well, that scene's there because it has to introduce XYZ character, or that scene's there because it has to show this piece of history or this piece of world building. But what you're really looking for is that each character or each scene has that conflict and that story goal that keeps the tension high. And if it also reveals setting, historical details, introduces other characters, etc., all the better. But you have to have that tight cause and effect trajectory of what the character wants at the big picture level, and that the steps that they're taking to achieve it are logical. Now, that's not to say that in the first half of a book, a character can't be doing things that are a little self-destructive. That's quite often what's happening in the first half of the book. They might be resisting the thing that they've been asked to do, right? Like, how many romances start with the main character saying, "I don't believe in love. I'm not interested. I'm gonna be single forever." And then the course of the story is their change of heart, not just about the particular love interest, but about the idea of love in general, right? The same could be true for mystery or thriller or adventure. Like, no, I'm not gonna solve this mystery. This is not my job. I'm gonna leave this, to the authorities or whatever. And then you have to, over the course of the story, show why the character is driven to try to find the answer to the mystery that you are having them undertake. Quite often in memoir, this idea of the problem that we get to watch being solved is deeply personal. It's an interpersonal relationship that you have to overcome. It's a key love relationship that might have some trauma associated with it, and that conflict, quite often can lead story you, the character you, to do things that are maladaptive or non-productive, right? And that's part of the story. And if you have defined the character in the right way, will understand why they're resisting the thing that they know they need to do, because it's hard, because it's painful, and that sort of thing. And then critically, does something change as a result of the scene? If nothing in the story changes, if you could cut the scene out and all that would be lost is a few beautiful words, you probably need to do that, even if they are really, really beautiful words, right? I just finished work on a verse novel, and I ended up with actually 20,000 words of verse cut from the novel. And they're all beautiful. They're beautiful poems, poems that I love, that I worked really hard on. But they didn't change something in the story. So they weren't serving the big picture of what I was wanting to do. So even though they were beautiful, even though they read really well and were magical and atmospheric and all of those things, they had to stay on the cutting room floor because they didn't serve the story that I was trying to tell. And one of the ways that I identified that they didn't serve the story that I was trying to tell was by using the messy synopsis and the tentpole scenes outline to have a really clear idea of what my story scaffolding was going to be. And then we talked a little bit about the cause and effect trajectory. That's the idea that one event drives to the next event. You try to go get coffee, and you fail because there's a tree down across the road. If you give up and go home, did you ever really want the coffee in the first place, right? This is a really minor example. But if they really, really, really want that coffee, probably what they're going to do is go in a different direction and try to find that coffee. They're not just going to forget about it and move on to the next goal because that's what you the writer, thinks is the most interesting way to move them through the plot, right? There has to be that internal logic to the choices that the character makes. And again, we'll talk about this a lot in week 3 when we talk about understanding a scene. Does every single scene have a point? Not just why do you, the writer, have that scene there, but does it make sense in terms of the character, what the character's motivations are, and where you're trying to move them through the story. So those are all questions that you can ask, not just about an inside outline if you decide to do it, but also about a messy synopsis or a tentpole scenes outline. Okay, so I saved the Cadillac for last. And this is sort of what I would call a like the advanced level outline. So if you're feeling a little outline phobic or a little overwhelmed by the idea of structure, you might not want to try a book map, or you might want to just try a book map for a few key scenes, maybe the midpoint or something that you're struggling to get right, because it is very detailed. I have had clients turn in book maps to me that were like 70 pages long. That's not the ideal. We don't really want that, but it's happened. So this is going to be the most in-depth of the types of reverse outlining that we're talking about. And this is a concept that that longtime wonderful editor Cheryl Klein came up with and talked about in her book, The Magic Words. It is a detailed outline. It's great for tracking a major change that you need to make throughout your manuscript. Like if you're adding a point of view character or taking out a point of view character, if you're working with multiple timelines or non-chronological narratives and you need to see how the pieces are going to fit together, if you're weaving in subplot side characters or themes and want to do it in a really intentional way to make sure that the subplots and side characters are showing up evenly throughout the manuscript, then you might want to create a book map for one or more of your scenes. And you can see just how detailed this is here. It's going to be not just the synopsis of what happens in the scene, and you can highlight in red anything that is changing throughout this process. But the when and where, the setting and the timing, which can be really important. I have a friend who talks about how she turned in a book and every single event that happened in the book happened on a Tuesday, different Tuesdays, but like she just kept picking Tuesday. It was like there were the other 6 days of the week didn't exist, and it was completely unintentional. And of course had to be fixed because it didn't actually make logical sense that things only happened on a Tuesday in her book. So if you get that kind of feedback, like there's a problem with your passage of time, adding this when and where piece to whatever outline method you use is it can be a good idea. And I do want to say too that you can do a stripped down version of this book map if you don't have really any problem with the setting and the timing. Then you can leave that piece off of the book map. You can smush these different methods of outlining together. Like I said, doing this book map level of detail for the key turning point scenes can be really, really useful, but you might not need to do this level of detail for every single scene in your story. You want to track your major characters, the scene goals, and the emotional change. A lot of writers will start each scene with what the emotion is at the beginning of the scene and what the emotion is at the end of the scene. And there should be a change, right? There should be some sort of reversal that happens. And we'll dig into that a lot more in week 3. But tracking that emotional change is one way to make sure that your character arc is on track, right? Because the plot is all of those external things that are happening, and the character arc is about that internal change, and a lot of times that's based on emotion. So you want to track in the book map new information. What do the characters learn, especially in a mystery or in a thriller where you might have red herrings and false clues and dead ends and that sort of thing. Really intentionally tracking those in your outline can help you look at the big picture of how your mystery is playing out. If you want to make sure, for example, that people don't read the first chapter and say, well, I already know who done it, right? Like you want them to figure it out just before the main character figures it out so that they have that good tension. They feel really smart. I solved the mystery before the main character, but not so smart that they figure it out pages and pages and pages before the main character does, which can lead to a frustrating reader experience. And then, what changed again? What changed as a result of the action in the chapter? And of course, if nothing is different, then do you really need this scene or chapter to be a part of the book? that can overlap with the new information line, and you can even combine those two together. Again, this is sort of a mix and match approach of whatever best works for you. And in my I have a template for the book map that's in the downloadables. And in there, there's a link to Cheryl Klein's website with an example of an actual book map for a book that can be really helpful if this is feeling like a little bit high level for you, and you want to see a sample to sink your teeth into. I'll be honest, and I said before, I'm a little bit of a planster. I am a pantser that does a little bit more planning now than I used to. I don't love doing a detailed outline like this. If I did a book map for the whole book, I would probably be like, well, in fact, I know because I've done it before. Well, I've already figured out what this story is about now. I don't even write it. I don't even need to write it, right? Like I like to have a little bit of mystery in my exploratory process, especially in the early drafts, where the characters are going to surprise me and tell me something. So I don't necessarily have everything nailed down in the early drafts. But if you know you have a story problem, if you know you have a structural issue and you don't know how to change it, how to fix it, then digging into this level of detail can really, really, really help you. And a thing that I often do too, either with the book map or with the messy synopsis, is I do weave in those tentpole scenes or those beats from the hero's journey, or save the cat, or story engineering, or all of these different sort of ways of looking at structure, because there are that is a good way of really understanding what the major turning point scenes are in the story, and making sure that you don't have a structural problem that you're going to need to address in revision. Okay, so that was like a fire hose of information, I know, and I want to leave plenty of time for questions. But here are kind of the key takeaways. All of these methods of reverse outlining are flexible, they're iterative, and they'll help you see the big picture of your story in short form. If you can't easily answer those 4 essential questions that were in the very beginning of the lecture when we were talking about the logline and pitch, you may have a story problem. Revise the story if you need to, rather than pitching before the story's ready. I promise it'll be worth it. I know a lot of times people are worried that they're making their story worse by tearing into it without having a clear vision of what they're doing. But very rarely are you digging into something that's already reader ready and wrecking it. It's more likely that you have something that's not quite reader ready, and you might make it worse if you aren't planful about your revision. But that's exactly what we're trying to avoid by using this reverse outline. So now you have a few more tools that will help you diagnose those big picture issues, so that you can revise with confidence, so that you aren't afraid that you're making the story worse by digging into it.